first off, I mean, what did you make of it? When was he back on the radar for people that were covering this closely? And what can we take? What was your takeaway from a 2-year deal for Rick Bowness at this point as the head coach of the Winnipeg Jets?
Yeah, I mean, I thought, look, from what I understand, Rick Bowness was a name very, very early on. I mean, I think it was in May when I was tossing kind of names out that I was hearing. Rick Bowness was on that list. Now, mind you, I had him as an assistant coach, in that I thought he was going to be part of a Barry Trotz staff. I can say that Barry Trotz was the guy that suggested Rick Bowness as a potential, assistant coach. I'm not going to say he was there, fighting for him to be the head coach after he turned down the Jets offer. But I believe that Rick Bowness was a name the Jets had for quite a bit of time. Now, I don't think that, as we heard Kevin Scheifele speak today in his press conference with Rick Bowness, I don't think there was a lot of dialogue in between those two things. I do think that after Barry Trotz, ultimately turned down the Jets offer, despite them coming to an understanding of what it would take to get to get Barry Trotz here. I mean, he wanted to sit on that offer, and again, ultimately decided not to come here. And I think the reality is that I think the Jets were a little bit pooched. I mean, I'm not saying they weren't doing their due diligence, but I think they were caught in a little bit of a rock and a hard place, not wanting to give Barry Trotz all the time, seemingly in the world to make a decision, but also not wanting to do a rebuild. And I think there's a couple names out there, whether it would be a Pascal Vincent or a Scott Arniel, that would have resulted in more of a rebuild. I think they wanted to find somebody who they felt could take the roster that they have right now and continue to push. And I think that's exactly what they believe they have in Rick Bowness. I mean, we've seen, as you talked to Dave Poulin in the prior interview, what he was able to do at Dallas. I think the Jets, you could make the argument, have a better roster than the Dallas Stars. So, I think the thought here is bring Rick Bowness into the mix, see if he can resonate with the players, resonate with, the organization, because that's another thing, part of this, right? I mean, you need to be working. I mean, how many times did Rick Bowness mention that he was going to be working in lockstep with not only Kevin Scheifele, but ownership? So, that was a big part of the puzzle too. And I do think that I don't know if the word convincing needed to happen, but I think it did take some pushing from people within that organization to say, look, Rick Bowness is your guy. He's the guy that I think gives you the best, is the best piece of the situation that you want, that you believe this team can have. And by that, I mean a team that can, again, doesn't have to be broken down or rebuild, that you could take those pieces and turn them into a playoff team this season. So as far as the 2 years, we can get into it, but I don't see it as a stopgap at all. In fact, I don't, especially for Barry Trotz, I don't think the Jets are waiting for Barry Trotz to come into the mix after a season or anything like that. As it has been reported already, there's a third kind of team option. I'm hearing kind of rumblings. I don't want to throw out any specifics. I think it could be even more than a third year. So we'll see, we'll see what happens with that. But I look at those 2 years and I see it as, you can look at contracts, whether it's to, Blake Wheeler, who, I don't think is going to be around, but you look at all the other contracts that, are coming up kind of in those next 2 seasons. I think there's a real opportunity for Rick Bowness to make a mark with this team. And if that happens, I think you ride the momentum. I don't think it's a stopgap for a better option. Given, we'll see what happens over these next two years or 2 seasons. But I think Rick Bowness, when Kevin Scheifele says that this is a new era, I don't think this is one of those things where, he's going to be here for a couple seasons and then gone, assuming, all things go to their plan.
Yeah. Listen, I'm sure a lot of people, and maybe me in particular, guilty, because we spent so much time talking about Barry Trotz, that the minute it was Rick Bowness, who we know is certainly towards the end of his incredible coaching career, coming on board, and then finding out it was a 2-year deal, that maybe, listen, it was natural, I think, for a lot of people to go back to the Barry Trotz question because of where he was. You've addressed that. What about the 2 years as far as, the makeup of the team? It really did seem like true north for a long time with the contracts that they signed. In particular, Wheeler and Scheifele and Hellebuck knew that these next couple of years was part of that window. And I mean, there are ups and downs, especially in a market like Winnipeg. What does that tell you about, their commitment to not any sort of like, there's some people to think, oh, this is going to be the tank commander. This is probably the exact opposite of that right now, I would imagine.
Look, I can't predict the future. I can't tell you what the Jets are going to end up being like under
Yeah.
Rick Bowness, but I can tell you that's not what the Jets' plan is by hiring Rick Bowness. In fact,
Yeah.
I think they're thinking the best. Again, whether or not that plays out, only time will tell that. But I think the belief in that organization, and not just Kevin Cheveldayoff, Mark Chipman, other people who they task, scouts, personnel within that organization who they trust, have been telling them about Rick Bowness and what he brings to the table. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say Rick Bowness is an amazing coach. It's not my job. I don't break down coaching, X's and O's and all those things. I don't have time for that, to be quite frank, with everything I cover. But I do talk to a lot of people. And the people who talk about Rick Bowness talk about him in the highest regard that, I've heard anyone talk about any personnel man. Again, what does that mean? Could mean absolutely nothing. I mean, he might not be able to do what the Jets are hoping he's able to do. But what I'm hearing about Rick Bowness and what he brings to the table, and, I'll echo a bit of what Dave Poulin said in the last interview, is he can resonate with players. He's the guy, he doesn't have ego. He's upfront. He has, he's a great communicator with not only veteran players, but young players too. I mean, we can look at, his most recent sample size in Dallas. And as you mentioned, some of the young guys have come up there, and whether it's Robertson or Hintz or you look at what he's been able to do with Tyler Seguin or Jamie Benn. But what I'm told is really impressive with him, or his, and why he's able to resonate with players, is that when he tells you something that, you're not doing well, or is trying to convince you of playing a different way, he is an absolute master when it comes down to breaking down film. And so he has an ability, from what I'm told, is that he has an ability to get players to buy in, because he not only he sells his sales pitch on systems are brilliant and film oriented. So he can bring players in and say, this is how you're playing. These are the results. You play this way and you'll get better results, not just as individually, but as a team. And I think that's I think when you look at some of the issues that the Jets are facing, particularly around their roster and getting that buy-in, I mean, if that proves to be true, I don't think there's a better, person. I don't want to say there's not a better person for the job, but I think those characteristics and those traits are exactly what you want from the next head coach, especially if you're not looking to, break things down and roll with this, with this team for, as you mentioned, Huss, this two additional years, being that window of being a, playoff, plus team.
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, I've spent a lot of time over the weekend thinking back and looking at, what the Dallas Stars were when he took over. Obviously, that incredible run to the Cup final, a bit of a step back last season, and then a team that, in my opinion, really kind of overachieved. I mean, listen, the Dallas Stars, especially come to the playoffs. I mean, the way, and listen, Ottinger had a huge part of that. I mean, you can't win in the NHL in the playoffs without goaltending. But, I mean, canned up, I thought Calgary was going to sweep Dallas. I didn't think it was going to overtime in Game 7, and Johnny Gaudreau was going to be a need to be a hero. But when you look back to where the Dallas Stars were when Rick Bowness came in and where they were when he left, you can make a pretty significant comparison to some of the top players on the Winnipeg Jets, in that Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn were the team when he took over. And last year, when they needed a goal, when there was a big situation, it was Rupee Hintz, it was Jason Robertson on the ice, as opposed to Jamie Benn. And Benn at some points was playing less than 15 minutes a game. What can we learn about that for some of the tough decisions that need to be made here in Winnipeg?
I think it's the fact that Rick Bowness probably doesn't pull punches, despite having the reputation of being the nicest guy on the planet. So I think he, again, speaks to his communication skills. It speaks to his leadership abilities and his understanding that you can appease certain players, at the detriment of the rest of the organization. I think if you look at the Winnipeg Jets, and particularly, Paul Maurice's history, he did exactly that. I think they have much different coaching philosophies. And, Paul Maurice, ultimately, when he took over the job, sat down Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler and ultimately said, this is your team. You run the room. I mean, he has said as much over the years. And I think that went off the rails. When you commit to certain people, over time, I think that turns into a bit of losing. You eventually your message is lost because maybe your message was never really there. And again, I've never been in a locker room with Rick Bowness, so I'm not suggesting that he's necessarily going to be a big kumbaya thing here and get everybody going. But I think when you bring a temperament that a Rick Bowness has and an ego that he doesn't have, or at least isn't inflated, I think there's an opportunity there to resonate with players. And so and whether you want to classify it as, the best players win, I think it's more to do with who's picking up, the information that he's delivering. I mean, if you're a coach who trusts your systems and you've seen success in the past and how you do things, well, the reality is that, if a guy isn't doing his job, whether he's getting paid $850,000 or $8.5 million, it's not going to work out anyways for you. So you can appeal to whoever you want. That's coach's decision. That's part of the politics of coaching. But when in your heart of hearts that it's not working and that it won't work, then you ride your system. And I don't think it matters. It matters what you make. I think when the reality is the head coach certainly has a say, in players and whether they should stick around, but it's the GM that signs the contracts and commits the money. It's the coach's job to take the players that the general manager has given him and create a winning formula. So I don't think you can look at, contract status and all those things. And I think if, as we've talked about, if you look at what happened with the Dallas Stars, I don't think, I think that wasn't the case. I don't think Rick Bowness did look at guys like Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn and go, I have to, appease you, or because you're making this much money, your leash is going to be extremely long. Now, there's going to be a difference in leashes in every locker room for different players, but I do think the reality is that the reality with Rick Bowness is, given his systems and given all the things, the reputation that he has, I think it's a pretty clear path in that you do what he tells you, or you do, and again, it goes to all the studying and hockey IQ that he has, and if you're not committed, then you're not going to be part of that, winning formula.
Jeff Hamilton of the Winnipeg Free Press is with us. Welcome to everyone in here. If you're catching us for the first time, make sure to hit that red subscribe button. We're live Monday to Friday, 1 p.m. Central Time, and of course available on podcast in around 3:30. As soon as we're finished the show, you can pick up the podcast, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. Remo, if you can, get this clip up. We've saved this one because it was the one very interesting, and it was a shorter answer. But Rick Bowness was asked about contacting players and was asked about reaching out to Blake Wheeler. This is how it sounded from the presser earlier today.
One of the players you talked to, Blake Wheeler?
I phoned him and left a message. He got back to me with a text, and we'll reach out and say hello to Blake.
All right. That was one of the more interesting comments. I mean, everything else was pretty much upbeat. I mean, that's sort of the guy that Rick Bowness is. I mean, what was your takeaway from that 10-second blip from Judy Owen?
I love Judy Owen. We'll just get that out of the way. But I called him, left a message. He texted me back. I don't know. I wasn't there when he called and left a message. I wasn't there when Blake Wheeler texted. I don't know what was going on in either of their brains, but I do, and we've talked about this. Look, this is my pure opinion. Just knowing what I've known from, covering this team for years and knowing what I, think I know about Blake Wheeler. I don't think Blake Wheeler is a Winnipeg Jet next season. He might not be a Winnipeg Jet next week. So I think this is a massive, from what I understand or what I've been told, is this is going to be a massive couple weeks. Maybe, for the Winnipeg Jets. We even heard Kevin Cheveldayoff say as much. I mean, that's not exactly a breaking comment. Of course it is. We have the draft coming up here and then free agency. But I do think that it's, I think this is going to be a big thing. You want to change culture. You want to do certain things. I don't even think it's about necessarily, trying to convince Blake Wheeler to come back. I think there's an acceptance on him. And if I had to guess, I would argue that it's almost Blake Wheeler driving that bus as much as anybody. I don't think the Jets are actively pushing him out. I mean, look at the Jets organization. They're not exactly known for telling people to buzz off. You know what I mean? Or
that being said, they're also not coming off seasons like this with what we know about that locker room. I mean, did they want it to get to this point? Absolutely not. But I mean, you'd have to
Look,
have
I
your
don't think
head in the
Blake, I
ground.
don't think Blake Wheeler is being thought of being traded unless Blake Wheeler is interested in being traded. You know what I mean? Like, he has a no movement clause. He could make this very difficult for the Winnipeg Jets to deal him. You know what I mean? So there has to be some kind of cooperation from 26 for this to happen, and I think all signs are pointing towards a breakup. I don't think Blake Wheeler will want to come back and answer all the questions of the offseason. I think, and again, this isn't an anti-Blake Wheeler rant. This is Blake Wheeler did a lot for this organization and helped them get to a certain place. And I think maybe even he's realized that he's hit kind of the peak of the mountain, and maybe there's opportunity elsewhere. And I think the Jets, you talk about.
This is Maurice moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think it's an understanding that, if the Jet, I think it's almost an understanding within Blake Wheeler that if the Jets are going to have a different culture, a different identity, the writing's on the wall that he can't shift into a different leader. Like, why would he want to be a different player on the same team that he's the highest paid player on and has been a leader for years? I just don't see it being a great fit. So,
I hate to say it, and this is not a knock against Blake, but that opportunity is not going to be wherever he goes either. And
I don't think I'd have to think that Blake Wheeler doesn't think that the opportunity he has in Winnipeg is the opportunity he's going to get with another team. I don't think so at all. In fact, and I've said this for a long time, I've wanted to ask this question for a while, and I don't know why I haven't, but it became a clear burden for Blake Wheeler, to be the captain of this team, to come out front and talk to media. I think the understanding, and again, I'm playing a little bit of pretending to be in Blake Wheeler's mind here, but I think there's the reality that you're not going to be the guy that gets the Winnipeg Jets to, that Stanley Cup championship. And I think he put a lot of work in, a lot of effort in, and I think there's an opportunity for him to maybe take a step back, not just, take a step back from having that burden, having that load on his shoulders, and going somewhere else and trying to compete for that championship and not be the guy who's the face of the franchise. Because that's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to be the face of the franchise. It's a lot of work to be the guy who has to show up. And I don't think Blake handled it well throughout. I'm not saying he handled it horribly. I just don't think there were stretches that he handled it well. You need to be consistent in your approach. You need to be consistent with your teammates. And Blake Wheeler was an effort guy. So his consistency involved, treating his body right, being the hockey player, going out there and giving it all. Now, obviously, his play regressed at certain points. He was a warrior and played through injuries and all those things. That's the leadership that Blake Wheeler brought. You need to be the guy off the ice too. And I'm not 100% sure. Actually, I know he wasn't in that way. So to me, that's a lot to hang on himself. And I think Blake Wheeler would like we're talking about Mark Scheifele before, would benefit from a change of scenery and maybe a little bit of a, less of a load for the stuff off the ice as far as leadership goes.
Well, we can't talk 26 without talking 55. And if the writing's on the wall that Blake Wheeler is not a member of the Winnipeg Jets next season, it certainly sounds more and more from people apparently in the know that Mark Scheifele is going to be back with this club. Let's talk about the fit of Rick Bowness to Mark Scheifele. And is that the biggest job in getting Mark Scheifele to buy in again and be the player that we saw in years past that obviously was absent, especially under Dave Lowry last season?
Look, I don't, Rick Bowness, from everything I've heard and just, his reputation, doesn't seem like a bullshitter to me. So I don't think he comes out in a press conference and unprovoked says he talked to Mark Scheifele and he's quote unquote all in or whatever. Right. I also think from that situation, just given what happened with Pierre-Luc Dubois, and I thought it was super interesting. And I had heard rumblings early on that Tortorella had interviewed, but to talk about the fact that, he kind of, I don't want to say mentored, but provided insight or whatever. I think, that to me is I don't know if Pierre-Luc Dubois knew that, but clearly they don't have a great relationship. And so I'm wondering too, I'm not wondering, I think they flipped the script. I think it went from as soon as that kind of Pierre-Luc Dubois saying, look, the Jets have seen this movie play out over and over and over again, right? For as many great contracts or good contracts that we've seen Kevin Cheveldayoff sign with this team to long-term deals, we've seen an equal amount of players go, I'm going to free agency. So, you can sign me to 1 year. I'll have arbitration for this. I'll make money. But once I get my opportunity to leave, I'm going to leave.
Outside of Trouba, who?
Well, I think you have just other guys like Sammy Neek. I mean, that's maybe a horrible example, but you have, Jacob Trouba, you have Evander Kane, you have, Dustin Byfuglien wanted to leave. I mean, I'm talking about guys that just wanted to go.
They re-signed
Josh Morrissey held out. Josh Morrissey missed camp. I'm just saying there's certain things.
Signed an 8-year deal. I mean, that's
absolutely. I'm just saying that the tough negotiation, there's a bit of a reputation. That's all I'm saying. And I'm just saying that there's certain guys that want to leave this organization. I think there's a handful of guys within that organization now that want to go. And so, I think the reality here is that, it's once you start hearing those things, and once you know that, those things can happen and you want to play hardball, I think you need to make a decision. I think the Jets circled back on Mark Scheifele, and kind of made him the one who's the future of this team. So like, that's kind of, and so with that, I think that's where you start putting things into perspective of like, where this team is at and the curveballs they get thrown quite often.
Well, let me say this. I mean, I don't think Scheifele's the future of this team. He might be the present for 2 more seasons, but I mean, he's going to be 31 at the end of that contract. I mean, I don't, and let's be straight about this. I mean, there's been so much talk about his contract. He's going to want to get paid. He's going to want to get a very significant raise. Yeah, and at that point, I mean, we know what they refer to the Wheeler deal as a legacy contract in the offseason or at the end of the year. Especially considering what happened last year. I mean, hey, I'd love to be wrong about this. I'd love Scheifele and the Jets to have an amazing season and Scheifele to go back to the player that, led this team to their greatest heights in 27-18. And I'll eat my words if that happens. That would be phenomenal. That's the best case scenario. I'm not betting on that. And that's why I think about these next 2 years. If there was going to be a guy, it would be Dubois. But if he's not going to be in that mix beyond 2 more years, we're sort of looking at these 2 years and potential trades involving both of those players, presumably at some point, which shapes the core of Jets 2.1, which essentially happens after those guys are out the door.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, even going back to it, I mean, I started to think about it. I mean, you caught me off guard a little bit, but I mean, there's the Andrew Kopp stuff. There's Patrick Laine. I mean, I just think there's different examples. Jack Roslovic, I think, is an option there. Some people might look at Jack Roslovic and go, wasn't a quality player. Well, maybe he was also a first round draft pick. So at the end of the day, like I'm just saying that, it's not an easy. I also think it's not an easy business for the Winnipeg Jets, right? Like I think it's, some cases it can be a bit of a tough sell. So I mean, to me, I really do think that roster management is not an easy thing to do, and particularly in Winnipeg. I don't buy, some of the stuff about Winnipeg and being a bad city. I think there are some people that I think there are some people who would like Winnipeg, and we've seen players sign long-term and that they would, they do appreciate here. They love playing in front of the fans. They love the environment and all those things that come with being in a hockey mad city. But, at the same time, I think it's, I think when you have seasons like you did last year, you're going to get tossed curveballs. I mean, teams watch the playoffs. They see teams go deep, and when you have high expectations and you fall well short of them, it then ends up becoming, an even tougher challenge to retain the next year.
Well, absolutely. And listen, I mean, you can get on, get in Chevy for some things. Hey, maybe they should have been more aggressive or whatever. The one thing I'll say, I mean, especially with the challenges that come with being in the smallest market and the coldest market in the league, they've done a phenomenal job at drafting their players and signing into long-term deals. I mean, the Trouba situation was one, but I mean, for every Trouba, I can give you Scheifele, Morrissey, Ehlers, Hellebuck, Kyle Connor, Dustin Byfuglien, Blake Wheeler. I mean, these guys all signed extensions here in Winnipeg. So I do think that's maybe a little bit more.
But yeah, that's fine. But
just the reason why I bring that up is that right now we're hearing guys want to be out. Well, why do you think that is? Because it was miserable to remember the Winnipeg Jets last year. They were underperforming. It didn't seem like they liked each other very much. It was a divided team. That's why people wanted out. It wasn't all of a sudden they realized 9 years after the fact that, oh man, Winnipeg, the winter was really cold, so now they want to get out. I mean, let's face it, this was about internal issues with the club. Far more, because I think the body of work that this management group has speaks for itself when it comes to getting guys to agree to stay long-term in Winnipeg. The roster tells you that. That's where I'm at.
No, and I think there's an argument to be made there, but I think strings are attached. I think there's guys that sign in Winnipeg with the expectation that they get what they want. You don't think Blake Wheeler signed here and was grateful that he was here for, that long deal? I think they were signing under the expectation that they, had things come across more than just money. I mean, these guys ran the show for a while, and then eventually with that leadership core, there was a massive divide over time. So I'm not going to sit here and argue that they don't sign. I said, there's guys that do sign big long-term. Money talks. And when you get drafted by a team, there's certain assets that you want or there's certain advantages you have to sign with that team, whether it's long-term money, all those things. And I think there is a leadership core that obviously committed. But at the same time, I think you look at what happens and how you deal with things, and you end up getting a little bit of a situation within the locker room where guys feel like they should have got more. I think there's a lot of guys in there that felt they were underpaid. And so, I again, we can go in circles.
Yeah, Nate McKinnon probably felt that same way. I didn't see that affecting him. I mean, listen, what can we say about that? I mean, if guys are signing deals and then are pissed off that they didn't get more, I mean, that unfortunately is probably no different in many other spots too. And what is, anyways, I mean, this will be a topic we can get to more through the off season. I quickly want to hit with the blue and gold with you because Scooch is coming up. But as far as this week goes, Jeff, we got the GM meetings on Wednesday. We got the first round of the draft with the Jets with 2 picks. How active do you think this team will be this week, and how different will the roster be a week from today when everyone's back from Montreal? And does it include 26?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I think there's definitely potential for, some moves to be made. I think there's, obviously they're not, I don't think there's going to be a significant turnover here. This isn't going to be a rebuild, as we know. This is going to be, the pieces in play. I think Blake Wheeler is very much a guy that is an option to get out. I don't think you're getting much in return for Blake Wheeler. Like, Blake Wheeler, as you mentioned last time we talked, Huss, is addition by subtraction. I mean, whether that comes from the salary his money off the salary cap, or a change in culture. In fact, if the Jets want to go the way of, getting rid of Blake Wheeler's salary, they're going to probably have to give up another piece. Otherwise, they're going to have to eat, whether that's a draft pick, whether that's a prospect, whatever that might be, or they're going to have to eat half his salary. I mean, those are the things that. Those are the conversations that are going to have to happen.
At half his salary, I think that if they do eat half the salary, and Blake Wheeler is all of a sudden a $4 million player for another team, he's still productive enough that if that is what is going forward, I mean, I think he's getting you back something in return. To me, it's all about how much the Jets are willing to eat as far as what comes back for Wheeler.
Well, no, exactly. I think, I don't think you're getting a significant player back, and if you eat half the salary, I mean, we'll wait and see. Maybe you get a draft pick, certainly not a first, of course, like a deeper draft pick. But I mean, that's, again, like that depends on all the factors of salary. I mean, that's a big chunk of salary off your salary cap. So you're not just going to trade a guy who you can't just trade a Blake Wheeler and not eat his salary for, anything in return. At the very least, you're probably getting nothing in return if he takes the whole salary. So, that will be wait to be seen. I mean, to answer your question, I think there could be other moves. I would be particularly focused on the blue line. Mm-hmm. I think there's some, Dylan Sandberg's making his way up. I think there's an opportunity to get rid of one of the veterans. Brendan Dillon's name's been thrown out there. I wouldn't be surprised if he was on a different team, not just because, I think Brendan Dillon's a great, guy. He's a great person. But I just think, his $3.9 million salary cap is appeasing to, veteran teams and to a team that isn't going to bring him in as, like one of their higher end defensemen. He's going to be a complimentary piece. And I think that's, that could be a potential thing. I think the blue line will be interesting. And other than that, just given what we, that it's not going to be a rebuild or a breakdown or a Barry Trotz like thing, because I think if Barry Trotz would have taken over, I think there could have been potential for a big splash and even the opportunity to move up, in the draft in that first round. Dare I suggest even a top 5 pick. So, but I don't know. I don't know how much that changes with Rick Bowness. But when you look at what we know about Blake Wheeler, and when you look at the blue line and how crowded it is with prospects ready to kind of make that jump. I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't a few moves in the next couple of weeks here.